welcome to Keepers of the Story, Indigenous Filmmakers in Stewardship of the Planet, brought to you by our signature partner, Telefilm Canada. I'm Melanie Windle, and it's an honor to be here with you today. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I live, work, and play on the ancestral territory of the Blackfoot people, comprising the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani nations, as well as Treaty 7 signatories, the Tsuut'ina Nation, the Nakota Bearspaw, Chiniki, and Wesley First Nations. This land is also the home of Métis Nation Region 3. If you aren't sure about what land you're on, please visit native-land.ca and let us know where you're tuning in from. Put it in the chat. For generations, Indigenous communities have told stories that reflect deep relationships with the land, water, and all living beings. Today, we'll hear from filmmakers who are continuing that legacy, using film to reimagine our connection to the planet and to one another. In just a moment, we'll be joined by Dr. Tasha Hubbard, filmmaker, Downstream Media, Nyla Innuksuk, filmmaker, Mixtape, Darlene Naponse, director, writer, producer, Baswewe Films, Inc., and moderator, Kristy Assu, director of funding programs, Indigenous Screen Office. But first, a tiny bit of housekeeping. The Q&A, please share your questions in the Q&A box anytime. We will save time at the end, and we will try to get to as many of them as we can. If you require translation, please click on the CC button at the bottom of your webinar screen. Go to My Caption Languages and set it to the language of your choice. Follow us on social media to stay up to date with all things SPF25, including exclusive content and sessions. And our partners make this event possible. Please support them by visiting our partner highlight pages on Hayes Summit and ask them about their sustainability plan. So before we start the panel, I'd like to warmly welcome Shelley McDougall, feature film executive, Indigenous Content and Development, Telefilm Canada, joining us after this short clip.
Telefilm Canada champions independent storytelling in Canada that is sustainable and inclusive. We are inspired by Indigenous creators on the value of connecting story, land, and language, and of protecting our natural world. Our commitment is to work through the lens of sustainability in all we do. As an investor, a promoter, a financial administrator, and as an employer, we will make positive change and reduce our impact by encouraging knowledge sharing, working in partnership with the industry to implement best practices, establishing science-based targets, and measuring our carbon footprint. With tools like our modernized budget template that now includes sustainability and EDI priorities, and our sustainability plan template requirement, we strive to encourage sustainable productions. Together, we can build a sustainable and future-facing film industry.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shelley McDougall, and as said, I'm the feature film executive for Indigenous content at Telefilm, and it's an honor to be here with you today at the 2025 Sustainable Production Forum. Once again, Telefilm is proud to be a signature partner of SPF, an important platform for knowledge sharing and for bringing the Indigenous lens to global conversations. Our goal is to encourage sustainable practices in cinema, and that means supporting creators who are leading the way in reimagining how we tell stories and how we care for the planet. Today's panel, Keeper of the Story, Indigenous Filmmakers in Stewardship of the Planet, asks a powerful question. How do we move hearts and minds towards climate action through the power of story? We'll hear from Indigenous creators across genres who are weaving sustainability into their narratives through character, plot, and world building, and centering climate justice and Indigenous knowledge systems in their work. At Telefilm, we believe in the power of Canadian and Indigenous creativity to reach audiences around the world. We are proud to support SPF as we know that sustainability must be rethought from all perspectives, responsibly and inclusively for a healthy and competitive future. Filmmakers across the country are exploring ways to reduce our carbon footprint, and we share your commitment to being part of this necessary change. Like all of you here today, I'm here to listen and to learn from the stories, the strategies, and the shared experiences of our panelists. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce our moderator, Kristy Assu, Director of Funding Programs at the Indigenous Screen Office.
Thank you, Shelley. And thank you, Melanie, for the introduction. I just want to extend a warm welcome to everybody joining us today, and also a profound welcome to all of the panelists. If you can turn your cameras on, that would be great. I'm so excited to dig into the work today. Good morning from BC. Can't see Tasha yet.
No. Sorry.
That's okay. So yeah, I'm so excited to see you all. I get to see you quite often, which I'm thankful for. Nyla, not so much, but good to see you. Yeah, so as Indigenous women in the media, as filmmakers, we share a responsibility that's often far greater than the public realizes, I think, especially coming from the work that I've done in the past and seen all of your work as well. Our work is not only creative, it's an act of responsibility. It's our accountability to our communities, to the land, to the culture, and to our languages that has been embedded in our ways of doing and being for centuries. And it's truly at the forefront of all of your work. So today we're discussing the question, as Shelley said, how do we move hearts and minds towards climate action through the power of story? How we, as creators, translate that inherent responsibility into concrete choices on the screen. So let's start with the essential question of responsibility for everybody. So in the practical day-to-day of developing, shooting, or editing, how does your responsibility as a keeper of the story and a protector of the land impact each one of your narrative choices on your films? Who would like to start? And please do an introduction if you'd like to.
I'll start. Ani, hello everybody. Thank you for inviting me, and good to see you, Tasha, Nyla, and Kristy. Yeah, no, it's a bigger question than, but I was thinking about just like the ideas around sustainability and understanding that, right? That cyclic life, that force that you grow up with, and understanding what you do right now is a responsibility to the future. And so I think my work has somewhat been in that way is that the story, you want to share stories and entertain, but also you want to be like hard in telling and around perspective, and so I think it's a bigger thing. But what I was trying to get at is that it's a huge responsibility for what I do. I feel like taking the images of my community and putting it out, but also when I work a lot in my community, so bringing film crews into into our reserve. And the first time I did that, I learned a lot of lessons, and I started to put up a lot of rules, which we wouldn't really necessarily do. Like, like we would just like be like, people would understand what to do around here. And so when those crews started coming in, it was like, no, you can't go past this space, and you can't go in outside of where we're shooting unless you're with somebody from the reserve and you have permission. So there was a lot of those things. But because even around like, when you think about it, just around the footprint that a film makes, it's huge, right? The garbage and then we're putting that onus into our communities, and now we're having to, clean up after these films. So there was a lot of things that started to like really understand, and how we had to put a lot of, um, just a lot of rules around what we could and couldn't do. And so it's been growing and growing and growing. And now, these projects are a lot more different too. So, the crew starts to understand it a lot more.
Yeah, I think that's the case for a lot of films. I mean, there's a lot of teaching going on, especially for people outside of our communities, non-Indigenous communities that especially don't understand or haven't been in your specific communities before, right? And mine necessarily isn't the same as yours, right?
Mhm.
Tasha, how do you approach your narrative choices or having different crews, in your community when you're filming?
Hmm. I tend for my doc work, I tend to work with a lot of the same people. We're always bringing in new and, mentoring Indigenous, DP and camera and working, and sometimes, now, sometimes they're our main person. But I think, there's always the paradox of, I want to tell this story about, and in my case, I'll be using Singing Back the Buffalo as my main case film. And very much from the beginning, having a very, a stated goal around bringing, how Buffalo influence climate and how they're being, affected by human-caused climate change. And yet the scope of the story was such that we had to put a lot of miles on vehicles, and normally we're very careful. We think about how many vehicles we need to bring. How do we film in such a way that we're minimizing our trips? How do we, those are things that I think, have always built in. And then, then we're going to make a film about 9 locations in post-COVID times when we literally weren't allowed to travel together for a while there. And that was really tough because, all of a sudden we're like, oh, well, there's a heck of a lot of vehicles that don't actually need to be, but it was just our funding requirements were such. That's changed, thankfully, and we're back to, again, trying to just be really efficient. So there's that practical element. There's the, being mindful of the impact we're having on the lands that we're on. That's a real, and that was the same in my recent narrative work as well. And so, there are those very pragmatic pieces that you're wanting to minimize the impact. And I think for the Buffalo film, we just thought, one of our we had 3 main goals for the film. And, one is, of course, Buffalo restoration and bringing them back and supporting Indigenous community efforts to do so. But the other was to call attention to the grasslands ecosystem. And that ecosystem, that particular element for me has always been so important. And I've threaded it into my other work because ultimately, I think about my work as centered around justice. And if that's justice for Indigenous people, that's also justice for the land. And what does that look like? And so, I had a student watch my film once and had watched all my films, and they were like, "You always put grass in your films." And I'm like, "I do, because that's my homelands. That's an ecosystem that is not valued and is seen as empty." And so I really try to bring that into my work because I know how endangered it is. And I can talk more about that in a bit. But, so it's the paradox of wanting to make this film to bring attention to, the importance of climate justice and Indigenous peoples and how that intersects, with our own gender justice and land justice. But then also, what's that carbon footprint? And, just trying to minimize that while still telling the story.
So the grasslands is a lot, in a way, the character of your stories, right?
Totally.
Just like the buffalo, and just paying honor, I think, to that land is incredible.
Yeah, it's always there. Yeah, it's always there. Whether people see it or not, we layer footage under stuff sometimes.
Nyla, I know that you were just in production for your new film. Also, Slashback came out a few years ago. Do you have any reflections on, how you have approached work in terms of sustainability and protecting the land? And does it show up in your characters or your world building?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, so much of our stories within the Arctic are rooted in our relationship to the land. And coming from Nunavut, the land is beautiful, but also incredibly scary. And it's something that it's just important to have a lot of respect for, and respect meaning like a healthy fear, and an understanding that you are a part of it, not something. There's an idea in Inuktitut that translates to breath called sila, and it's just this idea that every living thing is connected by this invisible breath. And then this idea of having to give back to animals that you've hunted, and because it's obviously becomes complicated when you're eating other creatures with souls and that sort of thing. But I think what's so amazing within our children's stories is that so much of our children's stories, including in all cultures, these kind of cautionary tales about our environments that we're in. And so we have lots of spirits that can affect the wind, the weather, and you can do everything you can, but sometimes they'll just be in a bad day and chop your head off or something gruesome. And so it's always been a part of the way I've kind of interpreted the land and stories that have been told to me. And then also just I'm working on a documentary with a community called Innuksuk, Joe Haven, as it's known. And there was a couple of ships, the Franklin expedition ships, that were found very close to two communities. And it's the first time Parks Canada will be co-managing a heritage site alongside an Inuit community. And the community did ask for the story to be told from within their community. And so I was reached out to, but obviously I'm not from those communities. I live in Toronto, but I was able to find someone who could be my co-writer and co-director from the community that really kind of had real responsibility to the community in a way that was just important to acknowledge and respect, because just so much within the story of the documentary itself is, these artifacts being brought up from these shipwrecks. And within Inuit culture, we believe that things hold, and spaces hold memories, and these objects being carried up and put on display are, part of a grave site. And so it's just kind of these kinds of things, even just from the management aspect, is just a complicated thing for the government and these Inuit communities to figure out, but then also navigating the politics of different institutions that have an interest in making Canada look great. And so it's, trying to, and there's always, I feel like, so many different ways to perceive the same story, and to someone it might feel this way, and to this community, even within the community, it might be seen and received or told in different ways. And so it's just just kind of managing that, and trying to kind of differentiate my own ideas and feelings, and then balancing that with the responsibilities to my community, of course.
Of course. Thanks, Nyla. That kind of ties into my next question too, is I'm assuming that most of you, if you're filmed in other communities, or maybe even just mostly your own community, how do you approach that with other communities? How do you ensure that you're still bringing your own Indigenous knowledge or whatever you carry with you as Indigenous women to those other sets and to those people? Do you need somebody like, Nyla did, someone from the community, to really help those along? How do you ensure that that project is still going on in a sustainable way?
Yeah, I can jump in. For us, it was really about relationship and having the development process in a way that I could, some of the people that were in our film I knew already and had relationship with because of my work as a buffalo advocate. And so, but even then it was like, trying to make sure we're having, some good discussions and having local people as our guides. So we did that. We had as much as we could, and then there were two times where I didn't have the relationship. So I would wait till I'd get an invite in the area, and then I would piggyback a visit, so that I was trying to always minimize the trips, And so, for example, one of the key stories in my film about climate is the Wolakota bison range in South Dakota. And I didn't have a prior relationship. So I, called ahead and talked with people, but a lot of times that has to be done in person. And so I waited and I had an invite to speak. And then I just was able to make a little dog leg over and spend, a couple days with people and talk about how we were going to film, what we were going to film, the how they wanted us to interact with their lands and the buffalo and then we came back, and I think only once we showed up and I hadn't met the person prior, um, and that was we were taken by another Indigenous group and got permission to come along, and it was literally we ran into them and the other Indigenous group told them what we were doing, and they're like, you should come with us to Standing Rock. And we were like, well, we actually have an extra day, like we could. And they, we went to visit somebody's an Indigenous rancher, and so those things would happen, and we kept flexible, but it really was about relationships for us.
Yeah, I think those are another piece that I think people don't realize how much time you have to take to build those relationships and how very, very important it is to our process in filmmaking. Christine, do you have any examples of that at all?
Yeah, I think, I think it's very similar. I think we all have very similar practice, working, connecting, reaching out, waiting, not jumping in, and Alanis has also taught us that for so much. But a lot of my early work that was not necessarily so creative, but more community driven, that they wanted documentaries about their community. I entered that it wasn't my film. And so that was a really interesting practice because I don't even think I have copies of some of those films that I made for the communities, because I would just literally make it, finish it, work with them. They were the leads in it. I was just getting their stories and ideas. They'd sit down with me and we'd edit them and then I'd literally give them all of the tapes, and back in the day it was a box of tapes and then a big hard drive. So it was so I that was my early practice, was just to do that, and they taught me that, working with different communities and how different everybody was, and then understanding my own responsibilities. And sometimes it's making sure that the information got to the right people, that it was safe and these stories were safeguarded. So but it was always too, and I wanted to say, was just to make that connection, you always always start with ceremony. And so then everybody kind of knows where we're starting from, and in the way. And we talk about the intention of our day, but also the intention of the film and how important everybody is. And because I think the film industry can be quite a hierarchy and a bit of a monster. And so, I've really been driven to change that in a sense where everybody feels equal. And knowing their roles and understanding that. And it's a challenge. It's a huge challenge, especially on features when you have 50 plus people working, and coming at you. And, but I think when you start with that and understand and listen and connect and work, and two is that working with the crew members, if they're not Indigenous or if they're not from my community, we have long conversations about if they can do that, if they are interested, and it's real, because some will say, oh, that's kind of not how I work or not what I do. And then, that person's not the right person to be working with. But we've been really lucky with a lot of our key people that when we bring them in and they get excited about it, they're usually mentoring, or they're and working with, especially our department will always be working with somebody from the community. We'll be oh, this guy knows this, we're all of this, and you can't go and do those things without this person, so so it all becomes different departments but really about the intention and just sitting and talking. And it's strange because it's such a fast world we live in with the films, and we gotta like, this time is money, but those conversations have to be so real and so, and to create that connection and that, responsibility and the love for what we do.
Yeah, for sure. Anyone feel free to jump in and don't feel like you don't have to say anything. I just want to touch on that a little bit more, Nyla, if there's anything about just listening to your traditional stories as you grew up as a child, is there anything that you bring into your productions now where you're like, oh, that comes from this space and this is what I learned when I was a kid?
Yeah, a bit. I mean, I'm also like in the case of Slashback, I was working with a bunch of teenagers, and so we would hang out and they would be telling me stories and stuff. But I love this idea that Darlene, and I heard her talk about this at the premiere of her movie at TIFF, was this like starting the day and setting this intention for the day of gratitude and that we're happy to be here. Because I'm used to kind of operating in the normal world, and I'm not on set every day because I don't make a movie every year. But so it's like I go without being on set, and then I get into prep and I'm like, whoa, why is everyone complaining about stuff? It's like, is there something wrong with the vibe? And it's like, no. Like, this is like, everybody's like super stressed, really like so much pressure on everything. And it's just so not conducive to the way I would like to make things. And to just be able to, from the beginning, having that clear plan. And of course, and kind of a plan for trying to, and that means finding the right people to work with. And sometimes there's always going to be things to learn from. It's not going to be perfect every time. But for me, it's always like, there were challenges. There's challenges sometimes with unions. I work with budgets that require us to work with unions, and there's not a ton of Indigenous people in the unions. And so trying to kind of recognize skills that some people might be bringing skills that and knowledge that makes them incredibly specifically talented for this job. And and if they're coming in, there might be some kind of knowledge exchange that can happen, but it's not this kind of like mentorship and like these trainees. And I find that to be quite just weird to be working in that kind of environment. And so I think also it's just making sure that you've kind of got the right kind of people around you, the kind of producers that are going to really fight for that. Maybe make movies under $1 million that I can make them with whoever I want. But yeah, it's just kind of figuring that stuff out. And then also with like docs and stuff, when I'm working within community, it's we usually start with a big feast, get some dancing, and then otherwise, if we told people that just to come and talk to us about a movie, like no one would show up. But if we play games, there's music and stuff, then everyone will come out.
And food.
And food, yeah. And then I was also working on a down south, so not in the Arctic, on this last movie, and we were working just outside of Six Nations, and the former residential school at Six Nations did send some Inuit students down there. And so we had someone from Six Nations come because we were filming in a house that was not a residential school, but it was playing as one. And so we just wanted to make sure there was like a set smudging station, a place where we could be kind of entering and exiting that kind of the heaviness of that work, and being able to kind of leave it at the end of the day as well.
Thanks, Nyla. I just want to know how, go ahead, Darlene.
Yeah, you sure? Okay. No, I'm just excited. Nyla, I'm just loving Nyla today. I was like, because I'm like imagining now these stories that you grew up with. So I'm like, I want to read those stories. And I'm also in this like grass, so I'm a very visual kind of like with Tasha's like grass. Anyways, but I wanted to just kind of like like how important now the producer part is coming back into me, how important it is when we were talking about crew and there was that video on the top of this where it was like recognizing budget lines for sustainability, but it's like recognizing budget lines for honorariums for our elders and for our people who are working not specifically just in like how would you say like ceremony or within that work, but are working with helping, making sure that the community is clean and that, there's all kinds of things that we can be really helping and promoting and creating around and work and giving people work in that way. Because I'm really, really, really trying to understand, because I grew up with this, where there was this like, there's very little worth for Indigenous people in society and outside of our community. And we grew up, we don't have much. So when I'm, we're doing these jobs, I try to hire everybody I can. So, these budget, and we hide them in budget lines, or they're coming out of my pocket or the producer's pockets, right? So trying to identify that, there's more support for that. And, but also like have been working with the DGC to recognize the knowledge keeper as a part of our top crew, like for all of like when we like there's certain things that people want, like, and you have to like when you're working with the unions and everybody, you have to have these proper ways of identifying the top line, like they're on the top and all of the role of the credits and things like that. So we've been really pushing, and it's been really good to like, yeah, have our knowledge keeper up there and seeing, just as like right beside our sound person, right beside our cinematographer. And yeah, so it's just like continuing working with that and finding more budget lines and more monies to help support community in the way that we naturally do.
Yeah, I just want to, that's really exciting. And, just thinking outside the box, because sometimes that it is tough when, so one of the things that we started doing, and we were actually inspired by now their name jumped out of my head. But they made Before Tomorrow, the women, Inuit Women's Collective. And I saw them when they came to Imaginative, and one of the things they talked about was childcare in their budget. And I was like, we can put childcare in their budget. And so we started putting childcare in our budgets. And we got a little pushback, but I'm like, my child was young, and I'm like, how am I supposed to do this? Like, yes, it's another layer, and it's about care, and it's about, how do we make this medium that we do family friendly? Like, why does it have to be so separate? Why? And it goes back to like, and I'm doing this from where I teach at the university, but there's so many silos in how we do things, and there's those divisions that come in, and I think that it's an ongoing theme of how do we take some of that separation down and be more, and Nyla, when you speak about the way you want your sets to be, I think that's shared with a lot of us, and sometimes that blurs or kind of bumps up against existing boundaries. So that's one thing. And the other thing we started doing with my first narrative, which is Meadow Larks, was we had a specific care person, and I know we weren't the first to do it. There were others that have done that, but she was on set every day she was available. So there was one week she had to leave, and we missed her profoundly because she just took care of of us on a spiritual level, on a mental level, on a wellness level, and it made everyone feel good every day doing what we were doing, because if any time we weren't, she was there to help us. And I think, it's just that ethic of care and relationality that is part of, and it comes out in the work we do, but I think it's also in the process. So we're like getting excited by each other. It's awesome. But but in terms of knowledge and community and making sure that we're not doing harm in the spaces that we're coming into. And we know all the stories of harm that the film industry has done to our communities. And so I think we're all really inspired on how we can do things differently.
Yeah, and that circle of care, I think, is so important. I mean, even if that individual isn't there, like just knowing they're there, and you feel safe in a way that someone's there with that knowledge is really impactful, I think, to the work. And you guys kind of answered my next question about challenges, budgets, and all sort of things. But is there anything you guys can think of? I mean, what else is challenging in terms of budgets or anything else when trying to encourage work that encourages, climate action or sustainable practices on your sets or outside of that?
I'd love to start because it's something I've had conversations with different people about. So with Singing Back the Buffalo, we knew very early that we wanted to have an impact campaign, that we wanted to have ways that the film could support on the ground efforts for buffalo restoration, but also at a policy level, because there are a lot of barriers to buffalo restoration and to grasslands conservation. And, there are a lot of silos in that world. There's the conservation NGOs, there's Indigenous organizations, there's Indigenous leadership, there's Indigenous grassroots, there's government. And so, having the film be a way to sort of try to bring those groups together, how to, shift thinking. And we ran into barriers around the amount of impact funds that are available. And, when we got mentored by a filmmaker who had done impact around 2019, 2020, and she was able to raise such a significant amount of money. So that's what we planned for. But the climate was very different. But there was just the funds were so oversubscribed that like what existed that, we actually had to figure out a way to do the plans we had, which were amazing and beautiful, how to do that on a much smaller scale. And we've had success, but it's been having to do a lot with very little. And I think that there are films out there that have the ability to help shift and change how we see our world and how we see our relationships in the world, because it is climate, it's also all interconnected. And so having the resources to do that would make all the difference. And so I'll just say that's a real challenge is I think we all want to make our work, and there's the ISO and there's more space for us to do that. And that's great. But I think that's a key piece that's missing.
Darlene or Nyla, you have anything to add about challenges? There's a lot, I know.
This is such an easy job. No. I kind of like, I think, Tasha spoke really good about it. And I think that it's always trying to get more money that is not kind of bleeding out of our budgets into other people's pockets and trying to keep it in our communities. That's, always a struggle. And that's always kind of like when you're like building a budget and trying to find that way. And as a community member, we're always trying to bring back the money into our community to create, a fair living here in our communities and on the reserve. But I think I kind of wanted to because I know our time's limited, but I wanted to my experience with Aki. So I'd shot this documentary. It was a nonverbal documentary for 7 years in my community and with my community. We had a very small crew, so that allowed me to implement really simple things where it's like bring your own lunch. And a lot of the people were also really very healthy people. So they're because it's just it's insanity, lunches, how much waste we have, and we try reusable stuff and things like that. But so everybody had their own, and we were lucky because even the ones that came from out of town, we had invited some sound recorders from Thunder Bay. Um, when they landed, they went shopping, and everybody had their own, kind of took care of their own lunches and their snacks and things like that. And it really worked. And it actually took a lot of pressure off us too, but everybody was in control of their own footprint. And so that really worked for us on our sets. And but when you think about like sustainability, and like it really becomes around like really understanding our connection with the land and allowing ourselves to really see it. And so I've been lucky. I was born and raised in my community. I was always out in the bush with my father and my grandfather and our family, and fishing and hunting and doing all of those really amazing things. And I was thinking about it because I realized that I was older now and that it's like, wow, so much has changed. Like our waters are so, there's like 2 feet. And this is like the second year that our waters are really low. There's like 2 feet, but there's all of these things. And, we're so in our communities, um, we're always in such a space where we're dealing with our past, and and all of these things that we're dealing with, that we often forget about that connection to the land and how important it is, and but also our responsibility of like making sure that we maintain it, because it was like when you said like grass is an open, it's just emptiness. Like people often see it's like, oh wow, look at your reserve. There's all these trees. And you're like, no, those trees are there. Like my Nyla was saying, like all of that has memory, right? And so those stories are within that, and understanding it and protecting it in that way, but really allowing ourselves to connect with it on a daily basis, and understanding it. And I was really lucky because I was like, went back to spaces with Aki, but also like because I live here, and just seeing how it changes throughout the seasons, but also throughout this, my lifetime. And it's it's a really scary world out there, like in the way that we think about it, because these larger, like mining is such a huge, that's my backstory of a lot of things if you know my films, there's always a mining story because that's our background, like over 100 years of mining in our community and no responsibility for what they've done, really, so um yeah, I don't know how to wrap this conversation up, but I think it's really important to like that connection to like really, really, really not just the surface, but like to really walk it, and understand it and listen to it, and note that, there's a huge concern around all of these new, mining companies and all of these new mining projects that turning out fast, and that they're not, properly consulting with communities. And like, these are the huge impacts that will last forever. They can move, but we can't. That's our land. Yeah.
Darlene, thanks. I think just being mindful of time is like what kind of, advice, that was great advice, Darlene, just coming from your community and the work that you do and giving us some context of your work in particular. But how would, Tasha and Nyla, how would you, let the public know or give them some kind of advice on how to approach filmmaking in these spaces or your practices? I mean, just building off what Darlene's talking about is, it's not just us as people, and we can put little things in place around sustainability, like bringing lunches or reusable materials. But what is the bigger context of climate action in your view, or what kind of advice could you give to the viewers? I know a couple of questions there.
I think it was so nice what Darlene was, and actually Darlene's latest film, Aki, is just perfectly, I feel like,
Beautiful.
sums up so much of these feelings of kind of this disconnection from the land, and then just watching her movie, it just feels so much like you're just a part of it, and it's and that and how much our lives are driven by our environments and the seasons, and how it shapes our communities, but then also the threat with the mines that are so close. I think it just show it that film is so powerful to me. And then of course in Nunavut we've got lots of minerals to extract, and as the ice melts, the Northwest Passage is opening up, and that's international waters, so ships can kind of pass through. And we'll be passing through soon, and I think it is just as a there's a film community of young people in Joe Haven where I'm working with Barb to make this documentary, and it's been so nice to get this young group of people, kind of our on location team, that are, because it's just like these things are constantly changing, and to bear witness to it, I think is important. And just for it on a personal level, on a community level. So yeah, being able to tell stories and talk through or process our feelings through these through story, I think is one way to I don't know, to try not get stuck in the stuck in the world that doesn't exist, and like really be connected to
and also I think the recognition of like we're not alone. There's so many similarities in terms of where we come from, what we've dealt with extraction. But Tasha, do you have anything to add about advice for young filmmakers or people in the industry approaching this work that they could hear from you too?
I think for me it's always about responsibility, and in my younger years because I was adopted out, and I had underwent this process of reconnecting and spend time working in documentary just in my community, looking at history and treaties and ways of knowing and understanding our responsibility, and that responsibility to the land is putting that forward as an ethic that we live by. And I think within the industry, realizing that we're telling stories, but we always still have that responsibility to the lands we're working on and the people who are living on that land. And I think when we think a lot about, I was talking to one of our impact producers who's only works on climate films, and we were just chatting about this panel, and he was saying, it's been really, this is the one of the first Indigenous films, and he mentored Indigenous women in impact storytelling and climate. But he was just talking about how much we've focused on connection, connection to the land, but connection to each other and connection across these silos to bring us into action and into responsibility. And when we think about justice and climate justice and change, it's all so interconnected to understanding whose territory you're on, and beyond land acknowledgement. It's one thing to know who's, and it's another to like, how are you acting as a person working and living on those lands. And we brought our crew into that. We especially with meadowlarks, which we were out in the mountains, and it was like, we were like, we told the producers, and they were so amazed. Like, well, one was an Indigenous producer, and we were sharing with our other producer, it's like, we can't just do one. Like, we're on different people's territories as we move locations, and we need to take that effort and to build relationship when we're there. And we had dialogue with the whole crew. We had circles we did it several times. And the last time we were like, okay, well, we were going to do it on the first day of shooting in a new location. And I'm like, no, I don't want anyone to feel rushed. I don't want anyone to bring that energy of rushing, and that, we need the speak, I'm like, no, we'll do it on our day off. People can come if they want. I want people to be there because they want to be there, and they want to learn about this territory, and they want to know the stories and understand it. And they're like, great, we'll get a room and da da da. And I thought to myself, if 10 or 15 people show up, like I'll be happy. Like 10 or 15 of the crew. Almost everybody showed up. We actually didn't have a big enough room. We all had to sit on the floor, and it went for 2.5 hours and nobody left. Everybody just sat and listened to the knowledge holder and shared their perspective of the, being on this land and so it was like the collective responsibility gets threaded in. And I think, as filmmakers, having and creating space for that is important.
Thanks, Tasha. Just being mindful of time. We have one question
I just looked at the clock because I was like, okay, wrap it up.
I'm going to ask one question, and then maybe it kind of ties into what you're talking about. And then I'd like you guys all to tell us where we can see your films, how we watch them. But can each one of you, if you can, talk about in working this way, how it impacts timeline, and if we consider making filmmaking sustainable, how do you lead and work with funders, broadcasters, and stakeholders? Big question. Sorry, but a great one.
I think that it's really important to have a separate budget for these things that are outside of the movie, and accessing funds that can't be spent on the movie and can only be spent on, these this sort of community work, I think is really, really helpful. And obviously having a team that recognizes the need for that, and that will take more time and more money. And those are things that we're always kind of lacking in movies. But I think also just having the Indigenous Screen Office has been incredible. I also got a Netflix ISO mentorship fund that helped pay, like a year before we started filming the movie, we were able to pay Evan Descharme and a bunch of different Indigenous and Innuksuk artists to create pieces of wardrobe for the characters that would have just not worked within the timeline of a regular movie. And it was just kind of fun to work through character with a bunch of different artists that may not have worked in film before.
That's one of the programs we're hoping to bring back, was cultural mentorship, because it's really, really important.
Yeah, that's great.
Anything else to add, Tasha or Darlene?
Yeah, I was also able to access that, and it was really integral to the process of that, just for me and as a filmmaker, but also like our relationship building for the film was so important. I think it's a both and. Like, I also would like to see budgets be more flexible with these kinds of things. And I spoke to the Treasury Board about a year ago, and I'm like, stop making it so hard for us to give protocol in our films. Like, stop, like making assumptions that we can't be responsible with our money with these kinds of things, that we have the discretion. I'm like, it's really frustrating. So, and that's one example, that we, another is travel. I've been running into this in development with the different funders where the travel is limited to, very specific percentages. And I'm developing a doc, and my communities and characters are hours away because I live in Alberta and I work in Saskatchewan, and my work and actually provincial boundaries are super annoying too. I'll just say that. But I can't just get on a streetcar and go. I have to drive there. I have to, and so that is frustrating, because that part of things in that early relationship building, which is so key. So having some more flexibility with those kinds of things would be amazing, to not have these caps, to trust that we're doing the work we need to do. We're not, going to, somewhere tropical with our travel money, that we're going to the place we need to go to do the work.
I hear you. Any reflections, Darlene?
No, it is very good what everybody was saying. I just want to say to young filmmakers that the partnerships and the relationships that you have with funders is really important. And also to echo that in a way that, I'm so grateful, during the making of this, when the ISO was there to protect, you know what I mean, my film and my community in a way that other funders were not. And so that relationship is really, really important. And so for one, filmmakers to make, and then for the funders to honor. So I always acknowledge that and thank you, yeah, for that.
I always say thank the people. Okay, last thing, where can we see your films if we can? We got 4 minutes.
Can I go first? Just because I'm in a classroom and there's a class that's like staring at me through the window. Singing Back the Buffalo in Canada, the long version is on APTN and APTN Lumi. The short version is on CBC Gem, which is the Nature of Things episode. And Meadowlarks is coming out in theaters November 28th. And so join our socials to figure out where yet. I don't have a list of confirmed places, but across the country. So we're so excited.
Awesome. Thank you. Where can we see your films? Who wants to go next?
I think, you know what, we just recognize that Stellar, the past film, is going to be on CBC in the next couple of months, I think. Falls Rounder is available on, I think most of them are available like YouTube and Crave. And Aki is yet to, we're figuring it out. We're hoping that it's gonna have a we'll go in theaters in probably like the spring.
Nice. For me, Slashback is on, I think, CBC in Canada and Hulu outside of that. And then my next movie is called In the Heart of the South, and it's not done yet. So you can check out my very sparsely used Instagram account for updates.
Look, we got 2 minutes left. You ladies rock. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
I'll let Melanie jump in.
Thank you so much for being here, all of you. We really love this programming. It's such an important part of SPF Virtual. So I'm deeply grateful, and I'm sending my gratitude that you were able to make time today. Shout out to Tasha, who is also teaching a class in Northern Alberta. I'm in Treaty 7 in Southern Alberta. So thank you so much to all of you for all of this. Darlene was at the very first one that we did. Nyla, I love Slashback. Like, I'm just so thrilled and grateful. So thank you so much for sharing. I feel like there's so much more that we can learn. And I feel this really leads to the theme that we had from Qualemia Sparrow from this morning, that we're here to listen, we're here to learn, we're here to absorb from each other and to understand about how we can be working together in better ways. So deep gratitude to all of you. Everybody who's watching, please go and follow them and find out. All these fabulous filmmakers are doing amazing things. And thank you so much to Kristy and the ISO, who continue to be champions, and Telefilm for supporting this programming. Thank you very much, everybody.